38 murders. The FBI had the files, and they did nothing. Not because they couldn't, because they chose not to. This is that story. Roy DeMeo did not look like a killer. That was the point. He was heavyset, friendly, the kind of man who remembered your name, asked a beau, your kids, bought you a drink without being asked. He ran a crew out of a bar called the Gemini Lounge in Canarsie, Brooklyn. Neighborhood place. Nothing special from the outside. Old jukebox. Regulars at the counter. The kind of bar you walk past without a second thought. But the Gemini Lounge had a second floor. And almost nobody who was taken to that second floor ever came back down. Roy grew up in Brooklyn in the 1950s. His family was working class, nothing connected, nothing that would point toward what he would become. He was smart, genuinely smart, the kind of person who have gone in any direction. But the direction Roy chose was the streets. Small-time loan sharking first, then credit card fraud. Then he caught the attention of a Gambino family associate named Anthony Gaggi. Gaggi saw something in Roy that most people missed. Roy wasn't just willing to do violence. Roy was willing to think about violence, to plan it, to systematize it, to treat it the way an engineer treats a problem, find the inefficiencies, remove them, build something that works every time. That quality made Roy useful in a way that regular muscle never could be. Gaggi brought him closer, introduced him to the right people. And by the early 1970s, Roy DeMeo had his own crew operating out of the Gemini Lounge, small, tight, loyal, and completely insulated from the rest of the Gambino family structure. That insulation was not an accident. Roy understood something that most organized crime figures learn too late. The bigger your circle, the bigger your exposure. Every person who knows what you're doing is a potential witness, a potential informant, a potential problem. Roy kept his circle to 7 men, all of them tested, all of them bound by what they had already done. Together. And what they had already done together was something the FBI would spend years trying to fully document. Because Roy DeMeo did not just kill people, he built a system for it. The system had a name, though Roy never called it that. Investigators would later call it the Gemini Method. And when the details of it first appeared in a federal document in 1976, the agents reading it reportedly went quiet for a long time after. Here is how it worked. The victim was brought to the Gemini Lounge under a normal pretense, a meeting, a conversation about money, sometimes just kess with someone they trusted. The crew was careful about this part. The victim had to come willingly. Forced entry, struggle on the street, any kind of visible conflict. That created witnesses. Roy did not want witnesses. Once inside, the stabbing happened fast. Not shooting. Stabbing. Roy had Dokken. Stabbing. Roy had T. A calculated decision early on that gunshots were too loud, too unpredictable, too likely to bring attention from outside. The stab wound was targeted, designed to incapacitate quickly and quietly. A towel was pressed over the wound immediately. This was standard procedure. The floor had to steet. Clean. Roy was particular about the floor. The victim, still alive in some cases, already gone in others, was moved to the bathtub on the second floor. And there, the body was positioned to drain. Completely. This part took time. The crew did not rush it. They waited. Then came the dismember. 2. Meant. This is the part that made investigators stop and reread the file. Because it was not frenzied. It was not chaotic. Each crew member had a specific role. The process was methodical, practiced, almost mechanical. Like a production line. Except what was being broken down was a human being. It was done. The remains were distributed. different bags, different locations, different days of the week, never a complete body in one place. Roy had studied the law specifically around this point. He knew that under the evidentiary standards of the 1970s, a homicide prosecution without a complete, positively identified body was nearly impossible to sustain. Defense attorneys could argue, and successfully, that without a body, there was no confirmed death. Roy had not just committed murders. He had engineered a legal defense into the murders themselves. The FBI received a detailed, written account of this entire process in 1976 from a source they considered reliable, with specific names attached to specific murders, specific locations, specific dates. They filed it, and Roy DeMeo kept killing. Over the next 7 years, the crew operating out of the Gemini Lounge will be connected to murders across New York, New Jersey, and Florida. Victims ranged from rival criminals to business associates to people who simply owed money and couldn't pay. The debt threshold that would get a person killed kept dropping. By the late 1970s, crew members later testified, Roy had become almost casual about ordering deaths. The system worked so reliably that the consequences of killing had essentially been removed. The FBI knew this was happening, and here is where the story becomes something that goes beyond organized crime and becomes something about how power actually operates in this country. There are 3 reasons the FBI did not act against Roy DeMeo for nearly a decade after they first documented his operation. I want to go through each one, because each one is worse than the last. The first reason is the one the FBI will still acknowledge today, the evidence problem. Even with the 1976 report, even with an informant describing the Gemini Method in detail, the Bureau faced a fundamental legal obstacle. No complete bodies. 1. Without physical remains, without forensic confirmation of death, created cases that experienced defense attorneys could dismantle. The FBI knew this. Roy knew they knew this. He had designed it that way. That explanation, on its own, is almost satisfying. It makes the FBI look outmaneuvered, rather than complicit. But then you look at reason 2. By the mid-1970s, the FBI's primary focus inside the Gambino crime family was not Roy DeMeo. It was Paul Castellano, Big Paul, as he was known, the boss of the entire Gambino structure, at the time the most powerful organized crime family. In the United States, the FBI was constructing what they believed would be a landmark RICO prosecution that could functionally dismantle the family from the top down. Roy DeMeo was connected to Castellano. Not directly. Roy operated through Gaggi, but the chain existed, and the FBI had made a stain. Strategic calculation that arresting Roy prematurely risked alerting Castellano, triggering defensive moves within the family, and potentially collapsing years of investigative work before the larger case was ready. Roy was a thread in a larger fabric. Pulled a thread too soon. The whole thing unravels. So the FBI waited. Months became years. The Castellano case moved slowly, the way large federal investigations always do. And while it moved, Roy's crew kept operating. The bodies kept accumulating. The files kept growing. Still, you could construct an argument that this was rational editorial strategy. Tragic, but rational. Sacrifice the smaller case to preserve the larger one. Except reason 2 still doesn't explain everything, because there were moments, documented, specific moments, where the FBI had sufficient grounds to act against Roy DeMeo, completely independently of the Castellano investigation, where the evidence was strong enough, the circumstances clear enough that the Castellano case could not have been the justification for inaction. And in those moments, the FBI still did not move. Which is where you arrive at reason 3. The reason that has never been officially acknowledged. The reason that, when you understand it, reframes everything that came before. There was an informant inside Roy's crew. Not a peripheral contact. Not someone on the edges of the operation. A trusted, close member of the Gemini crew who had been feeding detailed ligands to federal agents for years. This person was the source of the 1976 report, the source of subsequent reports, the source of confirmed locations, confirmed methods, confirmed names. The FBI's visibility into Roy's operation, the very visibility that allowed them to document 38 murders, came entirely from this one person. If Roy DeMeo had been arrested and brought to trial, this informant would have been exposed. The source of the federal intelligence would have been identifiable in the discovery process, in a courtroom, in front of Roy's lawyers, in front of Roy's crew. And anyone who knew anything about Roy DeMeo knew what happened to people who talked. So the FBI made a choice. Protect the informant. Keep the intelligence pipeline open, and accept whatever happened in the Gemini Lounge as the operational cost of maintaining that asset. 38 murders was that cost. 38 families who never knew what happened to their fathers, their brothers, their sons, were the price the FBI paid to protect one person whose name has still never been officially confirmed. I want to make that concrete, because it is easy to absorb a number and move. Andrei Katz was not a stranger to Roy DeMeo. He was an associate, someone Roy had worked alongside in credit card fraud operations for years. They had history together. Katz believed that history meant something, that it gave him a degree of protection within the crew. But Katz had a habit of talking too loosely, not to law enforcement, just to people outside the operation, casually, the kind of talking that Roy had spent years designing his operation to prevent. Roy heard about it. Katz was invited to the Gemini Lounge. His remains were recovered in pieces across locations in Queens. The FBI had Katz's name in an active file related to the fraud operations Roy's crew ran. When Katz disappeared, the Bureau noted the disappearance. They did not open a homicide investigation. The file reference to Katz was updated once and then left. The second case involves a man whose name most people have never heard. A car dealer, a small business owner from Brooklyn who had gotten into a financial arrangement with Roy's crew and fallen behind on a payment. The amount he owed was $1,200. He was killed for $1,200. His remains were never fully recovered. For years, his family was told he had left the city voluntarily. They had no reason to disbelieve it. The FBI had documentary evidence connecting Roy's crew to this man's disappearance. The file was marked inactive within 30 days of being opened. $1,200. Inactive within 30 days. The third case is the one that came the closest to ending everything. In 1979, a partial set of human remains, later connected by investigators to a Gemini Lounge victim, was discovered by a civilian in a residential area of Brooklyn. The civilian reported it to local police. The case escalated to the FBI field office within 72 hours. A formal investigation was opened. 14 days later, the investigation was closed. There is no public explanation for why. The closure is noted in the record without elaboration, but the name of Roy's informant, or rather, A file reference that investigators have since connected to that informant appears in the internal case notes from that exact 2-week window. The investigation that could have exposed the Gemini operation, that could have produced charges, that could have given 38 fam. Illies, some version of the truth, was quietly shut down. To protect one asset. To keep one person's identity safe. These were not abstractions. These were people. They left their houses in the morning. They had conversations that day. With family members, with neighbors, with people who remember. Read. Those conversations for the rest of their lives, because they turned out to be the last ones. They had no idea what was coming. They trusted people they should not have trusted. They owed money they could not pay. They knew things they should not have known. They were in the wrong place. Connect. D. To the wrong people at the wrong moment. And somewhere in a federal building in New York, an agent read a report about what happened to them, updated a file, and moved on to the next case. By 1982, Roy DeMeo had become a liability. Not to the FBI, to his own family. The Gambino leadership. P had tolerated Roy's independence for years because he was useful. He solved problems. He generated money. He kept his operation contained enough that the heat he drew stayed manageable. But by the early 1980s, Roy had begun to unravel. The pressure of what he had built, the scale of it, the permanence of it, had begun to show. He was making decisions without authorization, running operations that Castellano had not sanctioned. And in late 1982, Roy ordered the killing of someone without getting Castellano's approval first. In the structure of organized crime, that is not a mistake. T is a death sentence. January 1983. A car in a parking lot in Flatlands, Brooklyn. Roy DeMeo in the trunk. Shot multiple times. The Gambino family had decided the problem was easier to eliminate than to manage. The FBI, which had watched Roy operate for the better part of a decade, which had documented 38 murders, which had made the calculated decision to let all of it happen, did not stop him. Did not arrest him, did not charge him. The mob handled it. But the part of this story that I cannot move past, the part that I think deserves to be said plainly, is what happened. To the reason the FBI gave for all of it. The justification for every closed file, for every inactive investigation, for every family that never got an answer. The justification was Paul Castellano. The RICO case. The prosecution that was going to bring down the most powerful crime family in America. Paul Castellano was shot dead outside Sparks Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan on December 16, 1985. John Gaggi ordered it. It happened on the street, in front of witnesses, on one of the busiest blocks in New York City. The FBI did not prevent it, the case they had been building for. A decade. The case that Roy DeMeo's victims had been sacrificed for never reached trial. Castellano died on the street. Roy died in a trunk. The informant was never named. The files were sealed. And 38 families who had spent years not knowing, who had buried empty caskets or buried anything at all, got nothing. The system did not fail them by accident. It failed them by decision. Roy DeMeo is dead. Paul Castellano is dead. Anthony Gaggi is dead. Most of the Gemini crew is dead. But the informant, the man the FBI chose above, 38 lives, was never publicly identified, never exposed, never charged with anything. The last available federal record connected to this case lists him as a protected asset. No name, no location, no accountability. According to that record, he is still alive. That is the one detail the Bureau has never addressed publicly, the one thread that has never been pulled. That is the next video. If you found this channel today, this is what we do here. The real files, the names they sealed, the decisions they made behind closed doors and never explained. Subscribe, because the next one is worse than this.